Welcome to the deep dive. And this deep dive was specifically requested by you, Adam, from Chicago, Illinois.
Oh, great.
Yeah, you told us you've been trading in crypto for, what, about 4 months now? And you wanted to really get to grips with the fundamentals, so it's really great to have you with us for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is Season 2, Episode 13. It's part of our season we're calling Blockchain Blueprint, Cryptocurrencies, Digital Assets, and More.
Good title.
And we have to give big thanks today to Katie St. Ors. She's a digital asset tax specialist, and she helped us produce this deep dive, really made sure we dug into the source material properly to give you the clearest picture possible.
Fantastic.
So today we are zeroing in on the original cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. I mean, chances are you've heard the name, right?
Oh, definitely.
It's constantly in the news. It's a major topic for anyone in finance or tech. And fundamentally, it's where this whole digital money revolution sort of kicked off.
It really is foundational. I mean,
Yeah.
most other cryptocurrencies, they exist because Bitcoin showed what was even possible.
Exactly. And based on the sources you shared with us, Adam, the core questions we're trying to tackle are, what is Bitcoin exactly? Is it like digital gold? Is it just a new way to pay for things? Or is it mainly just a speculative asset for trading? Lots of angles.
Yeah, lots of ways people see it. Our mission here really is to cut through some of that noise, demystify Bitcoin, break down its core concepts in, plain language,
Right.
understand what makes it revolutionary, how it actually works without needing banks or anything, and, well, why it's become so significant.
Okay, let's unpack this then. At its absolute core, our sources describe Bitcoin as essentially digital cash without a bank.
That's the headline, yeah. Think of it as a form of money that exists purely digitally. But the really revolutionary part is that without a bank bit, you can send this digital money anywhere in the world, potentially instantly, without needing a traditional financial intermediary. So no bank, no credit card company, no central authority sort of sitting in the middle approving things.
And that brings us straight to those key terms that make that possible. First, obviously, it's a digital currency. That seems straightforward enough, money in digital form.
Right.
But the absolute game changer term, the concept that really defines Bitcoin's independence, is decentralized. What does that actually mean in practice?
Decentralized means there's no single point of control. No single company, no government, no central bank runs Bitcoin.
Unlike, say, the dollar and the Fed.
Exactly. Unlike the U.S. dollar, managed by the Federal Reserve or, your balance in a payment app controlled by that company, Bitcoin is operated and maintained by this huge global network of independent computers. They're all working together based on the software's rules.
So the insight here is that this independence, this lack of central control, it isn't just a technical feature. It's like a foundational philosophy, right?
Absolutely. It's designed to be resistant to any single entity just shutting it down, or freezing assets, or controlling the money supply like a government might do with its own currency.
That makes sense. That autonomy is core to Satoshi Nakamoto's original vision based on the sources.
Precisely.
Which, okay, naturally leads to the big question. How on earth does anything function as money without a central authority keeping track? Who verifies the transactions?
Yeah, how do you trust it?
Exactly. And this is where the brilliance of blockchain technology comes in, according to everything we read.
Right. The blockchain is the key innovation that makes decentralization possible for a currency like this. Our sources describe it as a public, immutable, and continuously growing ledger. Think of it like a global, shared record book that, importantly, everyone can see.
Okay, let's break that down.
Trade in your boring job for a brilliant career using Adobe Creative Cloud. Start learning now with the free trial link in the description.
Public, does that mean every single Bitcoin transaction ever made is recorded and visible to anyone?
That's right. Now, you don't see names directly, like John Smith sent Bitcoin to Jane Doe. You see these anonymous wallet addresses.
Like account numbers.
Kind of like account numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
So the flow of Bitcoin is transparent. You can follow the coins moving between addresses. The identities behind those addresses, though, are pseudonymous, unless, they get linked to a real-world identity somewhere else, maybe through an exchange where you had to provide ID.
Okay. And immutable. Unchangeable.
That sounds pretty hard to achieve with a public digital record. How do they do that?
This is where the chain part is really clever. Transactions get bundled together into these groups called blocks.
Right.
Each new block that gets added to the ledger contains a cryptographic link, basically a unique digital fingerprint or hash of the block that came before it. This creates a chain, linking them all together sequentially.
So if you wanted to go back and tamper with a transaction in an old block, you wouldn't just change that block. You'd have to regenerate its unique fingerprint. But then that would break the link to the next block. So you'd have to update the link in that block, which changes its fingerprint, and so on.
All the way down the line, you'd have to rewrite the entire history that's happened since that point.
Exactly. And because this ledger, this blockchain, is shared across that massive global network of computers, and they're all constantly checking and agreeing on the valid chain, trying to rewrite even a small part of the history and convincing the whole network that your fake version is the real one, it's practically impossible. The computing power required is astronomical.
Wow. Okay, that's security through distribution. And continuously growing just means new blocks of verified transactions keep getting added to the end of this chain.
Correct. It's a permanent, ever-expanding, tamper-proof history of every single transaction. And this shared, transparent, unchangeable ledger is what creates trust across this decentralized network.
Okay.
It removes the need for a central middleman to be the single source of truth.
Okay, so we've got digital cash, it's decentralized, it's verified and recorded on this public, immutable, growing blockchain. For someone like Adam who's trading, understanding this trust mechanism, it seems pretty fundamental.
Oh, absolutely.
So how does this actually work in practice? Let's walk through a simplified journey like our sources suggest. Imagine I want to send, say, 0.1 Bitcoin to a friend.
Okay, so you'd start by initiating the transaction using your Bitcoin wallet. Now remember, a wallet doesn't actually hold your Bitcoin like a physical wallet holds cash.
Right, it holds the keys.
Exactly. It's software or maybe a hardware device that stores your digital keys, the crucial bit of information that lets you access and control your Bitcoin on the blockchain. So you tell your wallet, I want to send 0.1 BTC to my friend's Bitcoin address. That's their public identifier on the network.
Got it. Then my wallet just shouts it out to the network.
Ah, yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it.
Yeah.
It broadcasts this transaction request out to the entire Bitcoin network, basically announces your intention to move those funds from your address to your friend's address.
And then the miners pick it up. I've heard that term.
Yes. These are the participants running those powerful computers all around the world. Their job is essentially to listen for these broadcasted transactions. Check them to make sure they're legitimate. Like, do you actually have the 0.1 Bitcoin to send?
Can't send what you don't have.
Right. And then they bundle a bunch of these verified transactions together into a candidate for the next new block.
And these miners, they're all competing somehow to add their block to the chain.
Exactly right. They're competing by trying to solve really complex mathematical puzzles. It's part of a system called proof of work, which we can dig into more. The first miner to successfully solve the puzzle gets the right to add their newly validated block of transactions, including yours, hopefully onto the end of the existing blockchain.
And they get paid for doing this, right? It's not just for fun.
Definitely not just for fun. As a reward for their effort, I mean, it takes a lot of computing power and electricity. And for securing the network by finding that next block, they receive two things. Newly created Bitcoin, which is called the block reward, and also any transaction fees that people included with their transactions to incentivize miners to pick them up faster.
Ah, okay. So once my transaction is in that winning block and that block gets added to the chain, it's confirmed. And my friend sees the Bitcoin in their wallet.
Correct. Once it's included in a block that's successfully added to the chain, the transaction is considered confirmed. Usually after a few more blocks are added on top, it's considered deeply confirmed and effectively irreversible. Your friend's wallet software, which is also watching the blockchain, will see the transaction and show the received Bitcoin.
How long does that usually take?
The Bitcoin network is designed to find a new block roughly every 10 minutes on average. So getting your transaction into a block might take around that long, maybe a bit longer, if the network is really busy and lots of people are trying to send transactions at once.
And irreversible. That's a really key point. Unlike, say, calling your credit card company to dispute a charge, once it's confirmed on the blockchain, it's done.
That's generally the case, yes.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental difference. It's fascinating, though, how these pieces all fit together. The bedrock of Bitcoin, the foundation that allows it to be decentralized digital cash, really rests on three core pillars, according to the sources.
Trade in your boring job for a brilliant career using Adobe Creative Cloud. Start learning now with the free trial link in the description.
The blockchain itself, cryptography, and mining.
Okay, we've talked about the blockchain, the public, immutable ledger. Let's dive a bit deeper into cryptography.
Yeah.
This is the science that secures the whole system, makes sure only you can spend your Bitcoin.
It's absolutely fundamental. This is where the real control lies. It relies heavily on something called public and private keys. When you own Bitcoin, you don't physically possess anything. What you possess or control is a private key. Think of this as a super long secret string of characters, like an incredibly complex password that nobody else should ever know.
The secret sauce.
Exactly. It's mathematically linked to a public key. And that public key is then used to generate your public Bitcoin address. That's the address you give out to people so they can send Bitcoin to you. It's like your bank account number, but on the blockchain.
Okay, so private key is secret, controls the funds. Public key generates the address for receiving funds.
You got it. And the critical insight here, especially for you, Adam, managing funds as a trader, is that controlling that private key is controlling your Bitcoin. Full stop. If you lose your private key, or if someone else gets hold of it, your Bitcoin is gone. There's no central authority to appeal to, no password reset. It's just gone.
Wow. Okay, responsibility is key there.
Huge responsibility. Cryptography also uses digital signatures. When you want to send Bitcoin, your wallet software uses your private key to create a unique digital signature for that specific transaction.
Like signing a check.
Kind of, yeah. This signature proves cryptographically that the owner of that private key actually authorized the transaction. It ensures only you can spend your funds, and it also prevents anyone from altering the transaction details after you've sent it.
Okay, and hashing. The sources mentioned cryptographic hash functions like SHA-256 used in Bitcoin. What's that about?
Hashing is like creating a unique digital fingerprint for any piece of data. A hash function takes an input, could be a tiny message, could be a huge block of transactions, and it produces a fixed-size output string, the hash.
A fingerprint.
Exactly. And the magic is, first, it's practically impossible to figure out the original input just from the hash. Second, even a tiny change in the input data results in a completely different hash output. So this is used all over Bitcoin. It's used to link the blocks together securely. Remember we talked about the chain and immutability. Each block contains the hash of the previous one. And it's also the core of the mining puzzle. Miners are essentially trying trillions of inputs, trying to find one that produces a hash with certain characteristics, like starting with a bunch of zeros.
Which brings us nicely back to mining. We mentioned it validates transactions and adds blocks, but the sources say it's also how new Bitcoins are introduced into the system and how the whole network reaches agreement or consensus.
That's right. Bitcoin's specific consensus mechanism is called proof of work, or POW.
Proof of work, meaning miners have to prove they did computational work.
Precisely. They use massive amounts of computational power, specialized hardware these days, to churn through those hashing attempts, trying to solve that difficult math puzzle. It's designed to be very hard, very resource-intensive to find a solution. But it's very easy for anyone else on the network to verify that a proposed solution is correct once it's found.
So it's a competition using computing power, and the winner gets to validate the next block. And they get the block reward and the transaction fees.
Correct. The block reward is the main incentive. It's a set amount of newly minted Bitcoin. And this amount gets cut in half roughly every 4 years, an event called the halving. This is pre-programmed into Bitcoin's code as a way to control the supply, making sure new Bitcoin enters the market at a predictable decreasing rate.
Towards that 21 million cap.
Exactly. And they also collect those transaction fees that users attach. So this whole mining process, this proof of work system, it achieves several things at once. It processes transactions, it issues new coins in a controlled way, and crucially, it secures the entire network.
How does the mining power secure it exactly?
Well, think about all that computing power, all those miners competing globally. The combined hash rate, or computational power, of all honest miners makes the network incredibly difficult to attack. To successfully pull off something malicious, like reversing your own transaction after it's confirmed, called double spending, an attacker would need to control more than 50% of the entire network's mining power.
A 51% attack.
Right. And given the sheer scale and cost of their hardware and electricity required to achieve that on the Bitcoin network today, it's generally considered prohibitively expensive and incredibly difficult, likely unprofitable. That's a security model of proof of work in a nutshell.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the foundation. Blockchain for the transparent, immutable ledger. Cryptography for security, ownership via keys, and tamper-proofing transactions. And mining, using proof of work to validate transactions, secure the network against attack, and issue new coins according to a schedule. That That structure is genuinely revolutionary.
It really was back in 2009, still is in many ways.
Now, let's look at the key characteristics of Bitcoin that come out of this technology. First, and this is one people mention all the time, especially when comparing it to gold, limited supply.
Yeah, this is a big one. There's a hard cap baked into the code.
What?
There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins ever created, period.
Never, ever.
Never, ever. This fixed scarcity is a core part of its design. It's why people make that comparison to finite resources like gold, and it heavily influences its potential narrative as a store of value, something that can't just be inflated away by printing more. For a trader like Adam, understanding the scarcity model is absolutely fundamental to thinking about its potential long-term price dynamics.
And while 21 million might sound like a relatively small number compared to, say, dollars, it's incredibly divisible.
Oh, hugely. Each single Bitcoin can be broken down into 100 million smaller units. These smallest units are called satoshis, or sats.
Named after the creator.
Named after the mysterious creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, yes. So, you don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin, which is obviously very expensive now. You can buy tiny fractions. Makes it practical for smaller transactions, or just for investing smaller amounts, which is how most people start.
Good point. It's also pseudonymous. We touched on this. Transactions are tied to addresses, not directly to names.
That's correct. The privacy exists at the level of the address. But, as we mentioned, if you acquired your Bitcoin through a regulated exchange that follows Know Your Customer, or KYC rules, then that exchange knows which address belongs to you.
So it can be linked back?
It can be. And also, blockchain analysis companies are getting very sophisticated at tracing the flow of funds between addresses, sometimes clustering addresses that seem to belong to the same entity. So it's not truly anonymous like cash can be. Pseudonymous is the better word.
Okay. Censorship-resistant. Because it's decentralized, the idea is that no single government or company can easily step in and block a specific transaction or freeze your funds.
That's the core principle, yes. There's no central server you can shut down, no single company you can pressure to block payments to certain addresses, as long as you can broadcast your transaction to the network and pay the fee. Miners operating anywhere in the world can potentially include it in a block following the network's rules.
And it's inherently global.
Totally. You can send and receive Bitcoin anywhere in the world where you have an internet connection. It works 365 days a year. No borders, no banking holidays, no waiting for international wire transfers to clear during business hours.
Which makes it easily portable. You can essentially move value across the globe just by controlling your private key.
Exactly. Transferring significant value internationally is, technically speaking, as easy as sending an email, without needing intermediaries in the middle taking cuts or causing delays.
And durable, as long as the network exists.
The Bitcoin ledger and the Bitcoins recorded on it will persist. The network itself is incredibly resilient because it's run by so many independent participants all over the world.
Okay, lastly, fungibility. Now this one's interesting. Generally, one Bitcoin is treated as interchangeable with another, like $1 bill is the same as another dollar bill. But you mentioned the public ledger adds a wrinkle.
Right. Fungibility means each unit is interchangeable with any other unit. With physical cash, you generally don't know the history of a specific dollar bill. With Bitcoin, because every transaction is on that public ledger, you can trace the history of specific coins or fractions of coins.
So could some Bitcoins be seen as tainted if they were involved in something illicit?
Theoretically, yes. Some regulated entities might be wary of accepting Bitcoin that has a known history associated with illicit activities. This is sometimes called chain analysis, or tracking the provenance of coins. However, for most practical purposes, especially when trading on major exchanges, Bitcoins are generally treated as fungible. But it's a nuance worth knowing about compared to physical cash.
Okay, that's a great overview of the characteristics. Let's shift gears slightly. Why was Bitcoin created in the first place? Our sources point to its launch in 2009 by this anonymous person or group, Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah, and the timing is really significant here. It emerged right in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis.
Right, when trust in banks and the whole financial system was pretty shaken.
Exactly. That crisis exposed major vulnerabilities and, frankly, a lack of trust in the traditional centralized banking system. Bitcoin was, in part, a direct response to that.
And Satoshi's stated vision, what did the original white paper say?
The title itself was clear.
It's one.
A peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The abstract elaborated. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution.
So cutting out the middleman.
Precisely. The stated goals, reading between the lines of the paper and early forum posts, were pretty ambitious and aimed right at the perceived failures of the existing system.
Like what?
Things like removing the need for trusted third parties, banks, payment processors who add costs, delays, and potential censorship points. Creating a monetary system that was transparent and auditable, where anyone could theoretically verify the entire transaction history and supply. Giving individuals more direct control and ownership over their money rather than relying on intermediaries. And importantly, creating a form of currency that wasn't subject to devaluation through government inflation policies, just printing more money or potentially vulnerable to seizure.
So it was really a kind of radical proposal born from a deep distrust of centralized financial institutions after the crisis.
You could definitely see it that way. It was a clear challenge to the status quo.
Okay, let's move on to something particularly relevant for you, Adam, given your trading. We need to talk about Bitcoin's role as an asset. Is Bitcoin an investment?
Well, for many people, it certainly is treated as one. Its price is determined purely by supply and demand playing out on global exchanges, 247.
And it is famously, maybe notoriously, volatile.
Oh, extremely. Dramatic price swings, both up and down, are a core characteristic of the Bitcoin market, something you've likely seen firsthand in your 4 months of trading, Adam. That volatility brings opportunity, but also significant risk.
Our sources highlight these different perspectives on its role. Some people strongly view it as digital gold.
Yes, this is a very common narrative. Because of that fixed, limited supply of 21 million coins, proponents argue it acts like a reliable store of value over the long term. Potentially a hedge against inflation in fiat currencies or against broader economic instability, similar to how people have traditionally viewed physical gold.
The idea being governments can't just print more Bitcoin.
Exactly. That programmatic scarcity is key to the digital gold thesis.
Okay, but others see it primarily as a speculative asset.
Which, let's be honest, is where a huge amount of the activity and attention comes from, especially in the trading community. Its value can be heavily influenced by market sentiment, news headlines, regulatory developments, macroeconomic trends, even just social media buzz sometimes.
So, potential for big gains, but also big losses.
Absolutely. It's definitely a high-risk, high-reward type of asset from that perspective, understanding that speculative nature is crucial for any trader.
And then there's the view that it could evolve into a major future payment system.
Yeah, this is still debated, largely because of the scalability challenges we'll touch on later, the network's capacity for transactions. But its use for direct payments is growing slowly. It's particularly interesting for international transfers, where it can potentially bypass the often high fees and long delays associated with traditional banking systems, especially if you don't have corresponding bank accounts in different countries.
The sources also mentioned other potential uses, like just a general medium of exchange, maybe for specific online communities or services, and that idea of financial inclusion.
Right, providing an alternative financial rail for the billions of people around the world who might have internet access, maybe via a smartphone, but have limited or no access to traditional banking services. It's a potential tool for them.
So it seems Bitcoin isn't just one thing. Its role is kind of multifaceted, depending on who you ask and how they use it.
Definitely. Store of value, speculative asset, payment network potential. It wears different hats.
And for someone actively trading like Adam, understanding these different narratives, the digital gold argument, the speculative drivers, the payment use case, it must help inform strategy and, importantly, risk tolerance.
Absolutely essential context.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do you actually get and store Bitcoin if Adam wanted to acquire more or someone listening wants to start?
Well, the most common way, especially for newcomers or traders, is to buy from a cryptocurrency exchange. You mentioned platforms like Coinbase, Binance, Kraken earlier. These are online platforms where you can use your regular currency, dollars, euros, whatever, to buy Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Pretty straightforward. Usually involves setting up an account, verifying identity.
Yes, most major exchanges follow regulatory requirements like KYC.
Okay. You could also receive it as payment, right? If you sell something or provide a service.
Definitely. An increasing number of businesses and freelancers are willing to accept Bitcoin as payment.
What about mining Bitcoin yourself? Is that realistic?
For an individual, generally no, not anymore. As we discussed, mining requires highly specialized, very expensive computer hardware called ASICs.
Right.
And it consumes a lot of electricity. So Profitable Bitcoin mining is now dominated by large, dedicated companies, often located where electricity is cheap. It's not really feasible for a beginner or hobbyist to make money mining Bitcoin directly today.
Good to know. And lastly, peer-to-peer, P2P transactions.
Yeah, this means buying Bitcoin directly from another person. There are online P2P marketplaces that help facilitate this, connecting buyers and sellers directly, often using escrow services for security.
Okay, so you've got your Bitcoin. Now, how do you keep it safe? This seems absolutely critical, especially hearing about lost keys. This is where wallets come in.
Absolutely crucial. And again, it's vital to understand what a wallet actually does. It doesn't store the Bitcoin itself. Your Bitcoin exists as records on the blockchain. The wallet stores your private keys.
The secret codes.
The secret codes that prove you own the Bitcoin at a particular address and allow you to authorize spending it. So managing your wallet is really about managing your private keys securely. Lose the keys, lose the coins.
And the sources mention different types of wallets. There are hot wallets.
Right. Hot wallets are connected to the internet. Think of wallets provided by exchanges themselves, or mobile apps on your smartphone, or software wallets you install on your computer.
Convenient for trading or quick access.
Exactly. They're convenient for making frequent transactions or actively trading because they're online and readily accessible. However, because they are connected to the internet, they are inherently less secure for storing large amounts of Bitcoin compared to offline options. They're potentially vulnerable to online threats, hacking of the exchange, malware on your phone or computer that could steal your keys.
So the alternative is cold wallets. These are not connected to the internet.
Correct. Gold wallets, or cold storage, are considered the gold standard for security, especially for holding significant amounts of Bitcoin long-term, what people call hodling.
Hodling.
Yeah, HODLing. Kind of an inside joke term meaning holding on for dear life, not selling. Anyway, cold wallets are kept offline. The most common examples are hardware wallets. These are small physical devices, looks like a USB stick sometimes, from companies like Ledger or Trezor. They generate and store your private keys offline and require physical confirmation on the device to sign any transaction.
So even if your computer is infected, the keys are safe.
That's the idea. The keys never leave the device. Another type is a paper wallet, which is literally just printing your private and public keys on a piece of paper and storing it securely offline, though these have their own risks, like physical damage or loss.
So for someone like Adam, the takeaway seems to be maybe keep a small amount you're actively trading in a hot wallet on an exchange for convenience, but for larger amounts you plan to hold, move them to a secure cold wallet, like a hardware wallet where you control the private keys yourself.
That's generally considered best practice, yes. Balancing convenience with security based on your needs. Don't leave large sums on an exchange long-term if you can avoid it. Not your keys, not your coins, is the saying.
Right. So security isn't just about the Bitcoin network itself being secure through mining and crypto. It's very much about how you, the user, manage your own keys and wallets.
Absolutely. User error, losing keys, falling for scams, poor security practices is probably the biggest risk factor for individual Bitcoin holders.
Okay, let's try to weigh things up now. The potential benefits versus drawbacks and criticisms. What are the strongest arguments for Bitcoin based on our sources?
Well, we've hit on many of them. That user autonomy and control over your own funds without relying on intermediaries. The potential for lower transaction fees, especially for large international transfers compared to traditional bank wires, although network fees can fluctuate quite a bit.
Right, they can get high sometimes.
They can. Then there's the increased transparency of the public blockchain. Anyone can audit the ledger. The potential protection from inflation, theoretically, because of that fixed, scarce supply. Its accessibility, anyone with an internet connection can potentially participate, regardless of their access to traditional banking, and those inherent properties. Portability, durability, and its general fungibility.
Okay, those are compelling points.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not perfect, and the sources are clear about these significant drawbacks and criticisms. We need to acknowledge the other side.
Absolutely critical to have a balanced view. Perhaps the most obvious drawback, especially for anyone considering it as money or a short-term investment, is the extreme price volatility.
Those wild swings we mentioned.
Exactly. It makes it a very risky investment and currently not very stable as a day-to-day currency for most people's budgets. Then there are the scalability issues.
Meaning it can't handle enough transactions?
The base layer of the Bitcoin network can only process a relatively small number of transactions per second, maybe around 7 or so, compared to Visa, which handles thousands. This limitation can lead to network congestion during times of high demand, which causes transaction confirmation times to lengthen and fees to spike, sometimes significantly.
Is anything being done about that?
Yes. The sources mentioned solutions being developed, most notably the Lightning Network. This is a Layer 2 solution built on top of Bitcoin, designed to enable much faster, cheaper, almost instant transactions, especially for smaller amounts, by handling them off the main blockchain. But its adoption and development are still ongoing.
Okay. What other drawbacks? Security risks. We talked about user security, but what else?
Well, while the network itself is very secure, users face risks like sophisticated scams and phishing attacks trying to steal their keys or coins, malware targeting crypto wallets, and there's always the risk of the exchanges themselves being hacked, potentially losing customer funds if they don't have adequate security or insurance. Another reason to control your own keys for significant holdings.
Right. The illicit use criticism is one you hear a lot in the media.
True. Because of its pseudonymous nature and global reach, Bitcoin has unfortunately been used for illegal activities like money laundering or buying illicit goods online. However, as we noted, the public nature of the blockchain means these transactions can be traced. Blockchain analysis is a growing field, and law enforcement is getting better at following the money. So it's perhaps not as anonymous for criminals as initially thought.
Okay. And the big one, environmental concerns about mining energy consumption.
Yeah, this is a major and very complex debate. Proof-of-work mining, the process that secures Bitcoin, does consume a substantial amount of electricity globally. Estimates vary wildly, but it's significant.
Comparable to small countries sometimes.
Comparisons like that are often made. Now, there's a lot of ongoing discussion and debate about how much of that energy comes from renewable sources versus fossil fuels, how it compares to the energy footprint of the traditional financial system or gold mining, and whether alternative, less energy-intensive consensus mechanisms could work for Bitcoin. But the energy use of POW is undeniably a valid concern for many people.
And regulatory uncertainty. Seems like governments are still figuring out what to do.
Absolutely. The regulatory landscape for Bitcoin and crypto is still evolving rapidly and differs significantly from country to country. This creates uncertainty for businesses building in the space, for investors, and for users. Rules around taxation, trading, custody, and use as payment are still being developed and refined globally.
And finally, just the sheer complexity of it all.
Yeah, let's face it, for someone completely new, wrapping your head around blockchain, private keys, mining, wallets, it can be pretty daunting. There's definitely a learning curve compared to using traditional money.
So it's clear that while Bitcoin is revolutionary in concept, it faces some really significant challenges and valid criticisms in practice.
Definitely. It's not a perfect solution by any means, and it involves trade-offs.
Which naturally raises the big question. Where does it go from here? What does the future of Bitcoin look like? The sources say it's still very much being written and subject of intense debate.
That's for sure. There's no consensus on the future. Proponents, the real believers, envision Bitcoin playing a major, perhaps even dominant, role in the future of global finance.
In what way?
Maybe as the primary digital store of value, the digital gold narrative winning out, perhaps evolving into a global reserve asset held by central banks someday, or acting as a foundational settlement layer for a whole new decentralized financial system built on top of it. Big visions.
While the critics, on the other hand, focus on those limitations we just discussed.
Exactly. They argue the scalability challenges will prevent it from ever becoming a truly widespread medium of exchange. That regulatory hurdles or even government bans could stifle its growth, that the environmental impact is unsustainable, or that newer, maybe more advanced cryptocurrencies will eventually surpass it.
But development is still happening on Bitcoin itself, right?
Oh, absolutely. Technological innovation hasn't stopped. We mentioned the Lightning Network for payments. There have been upgrades like Taproot, which improved privacy slightly and made more complex types of transactions and basic smart contracts more feasible on Bitcoin. There's ongoing research into potential future upgrades or even alternative consensus ideas, though changing Bitcoin's core protocol is deliberately very difficult.
So it's not static. The concluding thought from our source material really stuck with me. It said Bitcoin wasn't just another digital product, it was truly pioneering. It successfully introduced the world to the concept of decentralized digital currency.
And in doing so, it ignited this global movement that's fundamentally making us rethink core concepts like money, finance, trust, even how we organize things digitally.
Yeah. Its impact, regardless of where it ends up, seems undeniable. Whether it becomes the ultimate global money itself or simply acted as the catalyst that sparked all the innovation we're seeing now in blockchain and digital assets.
Well said. Its legacy is already huge.
Well, that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into Bitcoin. We have covered a lot of ground here. From its core idea as, digital cash without a bank, through the revolutionary blockchain technology, the cryptography and mining that make it work and keep it secure.
Nuts and bolts.
Its key characteristics like scarcity and decentralization, why it was created partly out of that '08 crisis.
Right.
Its really multifaceted role as an investment, digital gold, speculative asset, payment potential, how you actually get it, and crucially, how to store it safely.
Wallet security, keys, vital stuff.
And then weighing those significant benefits against the very real drawbacks, criticisms, and the ongoing debates about its uncertain but definitely dynamic future.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Okay, great. That's a wrap. I'm Katie St. Ors, and let me send out a huge thank you for listening. If you want more content on personal finance and small business, head over and find me on YouTube. You can also find me on Spotify, Amazon Music, TikTok, and Apple iTunes. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next Deep Dive podcast.